Welcome to another episode of Crash Chords Autographs. I, of course, am Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon, and some business up front before we move on to this week's episode. I, of course, want to thank my patrons, Rob, Robert, MJ, and Case. If you too would like to get a thank you up front in an episode of Crash Chords Autographs, all you have to do is go to patreon.com/Stormageddon, and I believe it's the $5 level or higher that gets you a thank you right here. I can't do this without you guys, so I appreciate anybody who gives. Of course, if you can't do the Patreon, I totally get that. A like, subscribe, share, review, and rating on iTunes or Facebook, all of that stuff helps. So anything that you can do to boost this show and share it with your loved ones would be greatly appreciated. On to this week's episode. It is the return of Viktor Devonne. I'm so excited to have Viktor back. A lot has happened since the last time he was on the show. He started his own podcast. He's planning a second one. I've since worked with him quite a bit. When he was last on the show, we hadn't really worked together much, and now we've become quite good friends. And so it was really great to have him back on the show and chat a bit about all of those awesome things. So without further delay, please enjoy myself and Viktor Devonne.
I'm not their first return, though, right?
No, I've had repeat guests before.
All right.
I only bring back the ones I like.
Oh, well. You don't just start off with the ones you like?
Right, exactly. Well, I mean, truth be told, there are interviews I've done with complete strangers, so I don't know if I'm going to like them. And there are some that have been. I've never had a bad experience. I don't think. I've had some odd interviews, but I've never really had any people I didn't get on with or that I wasn't able to talk to, really.
You were a communications major? I forget.
Yes. Yeah. Good memory. I feel like we talked about that at some point.
We either talked about it or it just makes sense
for
what you do. So, I was a communications major for a semester and a half. That was of the college that I went to.
Right.
So,
Until you majored in the theater.
Well, no, I never majored in theater.
That's right. The acting stuff came later.
But
you took classes in acting, right? Didn't you?
Yes, but as an adult.
Oh, okay.
I took acting classes. I had met a woman named Kathleen who works in Clifton, New Jersey, is formerly of soap opera success in the 70s. Mm-hmm. And like a lot of actors who don't necessarily want to be, on the grind, she went to teaching. She went to teaching and she runs her own conservatory and studio in central New Jersey and North New Jersey. And I wanted to basically when I made my co-director split in 2012, it was a very formative time, and what's always so strange is the fact that I feel like I've been in a formative time most of my life.
Right.
And so it was one of those times, though, where I was like, I just have to fucking do it. And if I don't fucking do it, then I'm never going to do it. And I wanted to take some classes, and this was probably 14 or so, 2013, 2014.
Okay.
And I took intro, which basically you learn to forget about being self-conscious. If you can't, by the end of that, you shouldn't be an actor.
Right, of course.
And I always approached burlesque as acting and as production, show design, and all that. But my individual work, I always try to be as much of a storyteller as possible, whether I'm portraying like a snapshot in Victor, Apocrypha, or I'm trying to portray a specific character that now I've started to do more.
Right.
But for a while, White Elephant was really known for these conventions in Central Jersey where we did a whole, long form
Yeah, I remember
show.
You telling me that you did mostly these kind of narrative things.
Yeah, absolutely. And we did they're sort of almost always the same structure.
Right.
You learn that in literature and in adaptations of literature, a lot of times people go the Romeo and Juliet route, the Alice in Wonderland route, which is basically the same as the Wizard of Oz route, which is basically central character wanders around and meets all the fabulous beasts, basically. And sometimes those beasts are human. So, and I loved writing that, and I loved constructing it, but I felt I didn't have a lot of the stage chutzpah, as it were. And so I knew Kathleen. I was comfortable with Kathleen. I had never been in one of her shows because she also directs community theater productions. And I thought I'd give it a go, to the extent where eventually I did audition for her.
Oh, wow.
For a play, which is one of the few plays the only play that I've done as an adult that wasn't under the name Viktor Devonne. That I actually used.
Did you use your model name?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it just wasn't Viktor. It was,
right.
Yeah.
It was you being you.
Yeah.
That
more
part
or less,
of you.
More or less. But I learned a lot from that, and it was Agatha Christie.
Right.
And Agatha Christie, while I've always been a fan of the work, of the, frankly, bits that I've known. I know, like, The Murder on the Orient Express, and then There Were None, and some of the more obvious ones, Miss Marple. But a lot of it is very dated, and a lot of it is somewhat problematic by today's standards. Mm-hmm. And I mean, some of it is problematic by those standards then too. But there's a certain charm and wit, and I love a good murder mystery. My favorite movie, as we talked about on Screen Snark, is Clue.
It's Clue. We talked about it the last time you were on this show too.
Probably. Yeah. It comes up a lot.
It does, yeah.
I actually had to...
You had told me, actually, that reminds me, it's like tangent. When you were on last time, 2 years ago, you were just about to go see the live musical.
Which turned out to not be the musical. It turned out to be just the live action stage adaptation. So it was a straight play.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, with Sally Struthers as Mrs. Peacock.
How was it?
I was very entertained.
Okay. I mean, that's all you can ask for.
The most thrilling moment, me and Gretchen Violetta, who is my best friend and was in the first ever White Elephant show, and I did Rocky Horror with, we got tickets together, we sat together. The very first string, we didn't expect much reference to the film because we didn't know what the rights issues were, and then we realized in the program, we're like, oh no, it actually is based on the same screenplay. All right. And the music, which is John Morris, which is one of my favorite film scores, the Clue score, and the opening theme, the dun 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 dun, which you can get on CD. There's a limited edition copy of the soundtrack that I recommend. That was like the most thrilling moment.
Right, when that played, and yeah.
Yeah, and then everything else was just pastiche and fun. It was very dinner theatery. There was no insight. There was no... Was
there still comedy?
It was funny.
Okay.
It was funny, but most of it was ripped directly from the script, and anything that wasn't directly from the script stuck out really, really badly.
Interesting.
So they changed a few things for reasons that I'm unclear on. Like, they no longer made Professor Plum a doctor. They made a doctor of medicine, like he was, or a psychiatrist.
Right.
They made him, I believe, into an actor, if I'm remembering correctly.
Huh. Strange.
Yeah, just little bits. And of course, whenever they had to do like the iconic flames on the side of my face, or any of the Wadsworth lines, it stabbed the cook. Like all of those, those had to be in it.
Right.
I thought Men Like You were usually called a fruit. Those things like that had to be in it. And the actors did the very best they could at not being
right.
Madeline
I mean that original cast is so flawless. Like
absolutely
there's no
flawless
way to duplicate that.
The only comments that you can say, in my estimation, that you can say about the quality of the film in the negative is that some things were lost in the editing. Mm. You can tell that some scenes were stitched together in a different way than they were probably written, or they were filmed in such a way where not all of the endings work out. But other than that, and most of it's forgivable.
Yeah, and most of it you have to be you have
You
to really
kinda have to know.
scrutinize.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
kinda
like
have to know.
it's very easy if you're just a passing fan.
If you're just watching it,
You would never know.
probably you may at one point go, oh, wait a second, if you're disseminating it after this,
Right.
Which invariably, if you're watching it with me, you are.
Yeah, of course.
But the Clue has been one of those things of it's one of the earlier obsessions. I've mentioned Get Your Shot Glasses Ready.
Yeah.
I've mentioned Rocky Horror before, and I've mentioned Madonna.
Yeah.
But technically, Clue came before all of those because I saw it on TV first.
Yeah, it was funny. I was going through old Halloween photos, and apparently I think it was a Halloween, but one year at the way station for some costume event, I went as Professor Plum because I didn't have any costumes, so I wore my long purple Joker coat, my purple gloves, and then I carried a pipe and wore a green vest.
Is your Joker velveteen? Is it Joker jacket?
No, it's kind of just cloth.
Right.
But yeah, it was a slapdash kind of thrown together thing. But I was wearing all purple. I was like, oh, I'll be Professor Plum.
Yeah.
So we're well into the podcast at this point.
Sure.
For those who don't know who you of course are Viktor Devonne.
Not so, of course, but yes.
It's funny talking to you now. Like, so listening back to the last episode, because I did that because I just don't want to repeat content,
Sure.
of course. It's interesting to listen to myself engaging with you as someone who doesn't really know you, and now we've become quite good friends.
Right. That's actually quite true.
And it's very interesting to listen to me kind of not tiptoe, but be, very open and casual and try and be very welcoming. And like, it's just, now I could probably talk to you for 4 hours without stopping.
You're very accommodating
Thank you.
As an interviewer.
But since that last visit to Autographs, you started your own podcast. I've been on an annoying amount of times at this point, some people might say.
Perhaps. You're actually in almost every episode because I use
my ad,
your
yeah.
ads.
Several of my ads,
Yeah.
because I'm the only person who sends you ads for podcasts.
I said I would host them, and then people don't.
But I'm on it. I'll have a new one for you for Fun and Games with Matt and Jeff soon.
Okay.
Which is the one I do with Jeff Moonen, a.k.a. the close brother of Dick Move.
Yes.
Striking
similarity.
Striking similarity. But yeah, you started your own podcast. I was guest number 9, if I recall correctly.
Very good.
So what inspired you to start a podcast? Was it just that no one was really interviewing nightlife folks?
It's not necessarily that no one was, because obviously at that point
yeah.
you were. But your scope is a little broader.
Right. I'm doing mostly any kind of entertainer or
hobbyist.
hobbyist.
We have a few. I mean, as of the date of this recording, I have released 52 full-length episodes.
Right.
With some bonuses. And there was a time there where I was doing some featurettes that I had a lot of interest in. The wrangling in them is a lot more difficult than I had anticipated.
Mm-hmm.
And the editing is a lot more difficult. If I think editing one portion, having 7 or 8 with all different sound levels and all, it's just a lot. I'm not opposed to it, but it's just something I have to prepare for.
Right.
And I hadn't. But no, what it really was is it's one of those things that I do a lot. I had an interview recently with Jed Ryan for his blog.
Oh, that's right.
And he asked me, so what else do you do? And what do you see like? And I'm like, frankly, I do a lot of burlesque, and then I talk a lot about it. And I know that to be true of other people who are in the acting adjacent world. If you're not acting on stage, you're talking about it.
Right.
About the gig you almost got, the gig you should have gotten, the people who are working that you don't particularly care for, the actors that you look up to, all of that. And burlesque is no different.
Right.
For as often as we are a snarky bunch, we also are a fairly thoughtful bunch. Mm-hmm. And indeed, most of our snark comes from a place of either, I think, a want for better regulation or respect for what we do.
Right.
Either in terms of what we're paid or in terms of our value in society or our value among our peers or the festival. I mean, if it seems as frivolous as the festival that we didn't get into.
Right.
Because we are of the mindset more often than not that we deserve it. And burlesque is a strange beast because it is very personal, but it's also entertainment. It's meant to resonate with someone in the audience, and it can be very masturbatory. It can be very self-indulgent, but most of my experience with White Elephant Burlesque and our origins is frankly us connecting with an audience that had not seen burlesque before and had certainly not seen burlesque with the bodies that it had or the accessible skill level that we had. And I don't say that in so much as that we were bad or that we were amateurish. We were quite good, and I don't think we could have gotten the shows that we had if we weren't quite good. But we were homegrown, we were self-taught, and there was something that you could look at and say, maybe I could do that too. And while that has not always been the case, I think I said to Jed that every body is a burlesque body, but not every mind is a burlesque mind. Not everyone can do this. It is a lot of work. It's very trying on the psyche and your friendships. Whether it's people that all you do is talk about burlesque and they're tired of hearing about it, or people, interpersonal relationships. This person doesn't get along with that person. This person used to date that person. This person isn't thought of as being right for this show, and you're friends with that co-producer. So why can't you put in a good word? Like all of that.
Right.
Why can't I put all of my friends in my show? I thought there was some sort of, no, there's not. There's no agreement. And then also the disappointment of people not coming to your show, or the disappointment of things not going the way that you want to. So it's a lot. It is a really hard job, and it's also a job. And then you take in all the other factors, like dealing with everybody, all the personalities and all of the venue owners and all of the promotion, and that can be quite a struggle. But White Elephant, since we predated a lot of we had LiveJournal, but we predated, a lot of the instant social media. LiveJournal, you still had to read.
Right.
And you still had to know to go there. There weren't notifications. You couldn't follow people in the same way. You could scroll, but it was a little longer format, so it wasn't as, instantaneous. And with Twitter or Facebook or screenshots, frankly, it's just a slightly different animal. So I thought, why not, relaying back to your earlier question.
I knew we'd get there.
I mean, yeah. It's all a rich tapestry. That I talk about it so much, and I talk a lot about it with people, and I'm an archivist. I like keeping track of things. Why not, do it? And I've had the opportunity of talking to people that I know very well, but I've gotten an opportunity to know differently. Like I've had really great conversations with Vanka before, but I can't say that I had ever spoken to her about her sex work, and I can't say I'd ever spoken to her about her opinions on things like Fosta Sesta. I'm really tight with Lillian Bussell of Jersey City. We talk all the time. In fact, I think we are go-tos when it comes to, did you see this? What happened? Or what do you think? Or, oh, yawn, or things like that. Oh, the things. Oh, my goodness. And we're never cruel. I will like to point that out. But it's important to have a sounding board that also will hold you accountable.
Right.
Because there are times where we go like, can we just get a sanity check?
Yeah.
I see this. What am I seeing? And fortunately, we have the friendship where the other can say, oh, no, that's exactly what's happening. Or, I don't know. Maybe you should ask. Or something like that.
Right.
And in terms of... I struggle because it is called We Burlesque, and it does technically extend into the nightlife realm. I've had drag performers on there. I have had people who do not. I've had a DJ,
yes,
for example. I've had producers that are not literally burlesque performers.
Right.
But I'm, I love that name, and I want to be as consistent as possible. So I use
also you talked about before that White Elephant Burlesque and White Elephant is a brand as well.
Absolutely.
As well
I
as
pay taxes on it.
Right. And I think it comes from that. Well, what's funny is, you've been doing you're in your second season of the podcast now, and you've been doing it for quite a while. But also, since we last spoke, I've become a producer. I'm not just
Had you not been at that point?
If I had been, it hadn't been very much, because we're only coming up on Magical Girl Burlesque's 3rd birthday this year.
Okay.
So
I think I would have worked with you once already, or I'd been very close to.
Right. Well, we had talked a bunch at Nerdlesque Fest because that's when we had talked about it. And I think you at that point, you hadn't booked me for White Elephant for DJing yet, but shortly after that, you had booked me for DJing, I believe. It wasn't long after we had first spoken. I think that summer was the first. No?
Yeah. No, I agree with you. No meaning yes.
No meaning yes.
I believe so because, I mean, I can speak with people that and work with people that I don't know very well, but it is always better for me to have some sense of who they are.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not necessarily that I keep people at arm's length, but it is that I welcome the opportunity to get to know people.
Yeah.
Which is funny for someone who doesn't necessarily engage that socially. All of the people that I know are mostly in the nightlife scene.
That's become the case for me. Like, I still have friends outside of it, but most of them are either long distance that I play video games with online, or they're people who got married and moved away, and so I only see a couple times a year. Mm-hmm. You know, most of the people that I see regularly at this point are nightlife adjacent, or friends who aren't in nightlife who will come to shows in nightlife.
Right, in which case, you know,
they're nightlife.
They're nightlife.
Yeah.
It would be interesting. I haven't done it yet. I haven't spoken to someone who on the podcast speaks to the strictly audience member perspective, which I would be open to.
I think it'd be interesting, and there are definitely regulars of. It's funny though, all of the regular attendees I can think of have now at some point transitioned they've either dabbled or become performers. Right. Like my first thought would have been Nate Ryder, who has performed now, only once, but he has. You know, or well, if you're doing it correctly, in my estimation, if you're doing burlesque, at least a version of burlesque correctly, because I do believe that there are multiple facets, and some burlesque are less invitational than others, and that doesn't make them wrong. Right. In fact, what it does is it sort of lets you know again that it is a skill set, and that not everyone can do it. So if you see a show and you don't feel invited, that doesn't necessarily mean it was a bad show. But I think club shows specifically, shows that are done in clubs or in bars or on smaller stages, if they are not invitational to audience members to feel like, oh, maybe I could, then I think you should adjust your presentation format. Sure. You should, even if you don't want everyone to do it. Which is difficult because burlesque, as I've noticed, is one of those disciplines where, because it feels accessible, there are people who see it and then immediately try to do it. Not immediately, but eventually try to do it. And that is one of those disciplines that you can't say. You can't say that about, you know, ballet. You can't say that about tap. It may encourage you, or a Broadway show, or opera, it may encourage you to explore your level of it, but if you see bar burlesque, you could be doing bar burlesque in no time. Yeah. If you go to the Neil Simon Theater and see a show, you will probably not be doing Neil Simon Theater level work that quickly. You might do community theater, you might take an acting class, you might do whatever you want. But burlesque is one of those situations where you can technically edge your way in really quickly and be just one of the folks really fast. And we've seen that happen. Yeah. We've seen performers who are relatively new to the scene who are gigging just as hard as everybody else does. Yep. And I think that makes some performers sometimes scared, sometimes resentful. Why are these people getting work when I've put in my time? Yeah. And I will tell you why. Those people are new, and we like things that are fresh and exciting. And there was a time where you were exuberant and not so bitter. Well, and also, and something that Magical Girl prides themselves on is giving a stage to newer performers. Yes. While we book our headliners, as it were, people who are names or who are at least known in the New York scene, we also try and leave room.
The seasoned.
We leave room for newer performers, and that's why we do the new review, which is not only for new performers, but it's for new acts or for workshopping, because that's a show where it's not even about, there's an agreement. You will get video and feedback. Yeah. But
you're allowed to play.
Right.
I mean, there are very few shows that are geared towards playing.
Right.
Most shows are geared towards being your A+ self for analysis. And that analysis either comes in two forms. It comes from the audience perspective as accessing it and then feeling really good about it, or not liking it, but hopefully feeling really good about it and saying, I felt connected. Or for performers to analyze it and then compare themselves and contrast themselves,
right.
criticize it, not necessarily in a negative way, but criticism as a concept, peer review, or then book. Because there are so many times where we as performers who are also producers see acts that we then know that would be right for our show.
Right. Well, yeah, and it's funny, being a producer and not a performer yet, I'm working on some stuff, but not feeling comfortable performing yet, I often defer to Betty and Raina, my co-producers, because for the video game show, I did a lot of the booking for that because I also am more knowledgeable about video games than both of them. They know, but not as much as I do. And so they leaned on me to book that show. But for other shows that I'm not experienced,
the media.
Right. And that show was also an anomaly because I had that set list kind of in my head for a while. And it was all established performers for the most part. And it was because
established acts, too.
Right.
I think most of that were existing acts that you then were able to curate.
I think the Waluigi act that Dick did was the only new one for the show. And he'd been wanting to do it for a while. It was actually originally supposed to be in our December show that we did, but he wasn't available because it was a December song that he used, The Sporting Life. But for other shows, I lean on Raina and Betty to pick performers and pick flow because they perform. And I'm not yet, and so it's a perspective that I don't really have quite yet.
Yeah, but you can set. You have the ability to curate.
Sure. But I think it's when picking performers, if we get 30 submissions, which I'm exaggerating, and I see names that I know, I'll lean on them, whereas the newer performers, they'll know better because they do the new review, which I can't always attend.
Yeah, White Elephant has scaled back in both our terms of in terms of our scheduling. We're now twice a month.
Twice a month,
bar.
Right?
More or less. I like saying first and third because some months have 5 weeks.
Okay.
So that gets a little iffy if you say every other. So yes, but we are at least twice. Pride might be interesting. I'm not quite sure how we're handling that yet. But that said, that also means that since we're scaling back how many shows, and that's largely due to the fact that I'm also now bi-coastal, which is also a development that since our last visit.
Yes, you've gotten engaged and gotten married.
I have. I
Shout
waste
out
no
to
time.
Rob, who we love.
I waste no time whatsoever.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that was, and we can get into the specifics of that if you'd like, but specifically what the hell I'll do once I get to California. But that also meant that the theme shows got chopped for the most part because I have too many people who I want to include in the show and people who want to be included in the show for me to then automatically know that there's a specific theme that threads them together without keeping weeks entirely unbooked so that I plan for those weeks specifically and say, no, that's Celine Dion night. No, that's Star Wars night. No, that's horror movie night or what have you. I think the next one that we have even tentatively planned is the first week of July because Jason, who is the owner of the bar, it's his birthday week. And so what happens a lot of times is we'll do a theme that is most appropriate for him. As sort of a thank you for his service, as well as an opportunity if he wants it. He's done it 3 times to also perform.
Cool.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask because we're getting close to May, and you've done the last couple of years, you've done a variation on May the 4th, or, the franchises strike back about other franchises that weren't necessarily
but a direct commentary
on Star Wars. Yeah. And so I'm getting the sense that you're not going to be doing something like that.
I will not be.
But
I'm not
sense.
in town. I'm not in town, actually. Oh. I will be gone for all of May. I'll be in California. I got into the Hollywood Burlesque Festival.
Oh, awesome.
Yes.
That's amazing.
Thank you. Which will be the end of May, beginning of June. It's one of those, It always sucks when an event is literally 2 days long, but they're in both months.
Both months, like the end and beginning.
But so yeah, I'm already going to be in town for that. So I've taken the opportunity to spend more time with my husband before that happens at the end of his school term, because he's a college professor, and then try to book locally in that area, which I mean, as of the time of this recording, I've been able to secure 2 more appearances while I'm there.
That's great.
Yes, thank you.
It's funny you mentioned that your husband's a professor and now Hot for Teacher is in my head, and I feel like you need to do a Hot for Teacher act.
You know, I'm good. As someone who has never quite been a fan of that song.
Oh, yeah, it is not... let's just say Van Halen hasn't lived up. But it hasn't aged well. And I love Van Halen, but like some of the David Lee Roth stuff is not okay.
Yeah.
To say the least.
It's also, I mean, I've seen people do far better. Delilah has a great act to that.
Yeah.
So,
and also,
someone fills that void for me.
And Hot for Teacher is like one of those songs like Diamonds Are Forever and those kind of things. Like,
I would sooner do Diamonds Are Forever.
Really? Interesting. Huh.
I would do Diamonds Are Forever and not wear a damn diamond.
Well, that's like Nasty the Canasta has a Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend act where she comes on stage dressed as a miner with a giant pickaxe.
Perfect.
Because it's Nasty Canasta and like and so
does she find a diamond at the end?
I don't remember. Okay. I don't remember. It's been a while since I've seen it, but that was her answer to like everyone has a Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend act if you're in burlesque. And so that was her answer to it.
I think we've taken a dip. But yes, absolutely.
Well,
so much, in fact, it's even referenced in the movie Burlesque.
Oh, wow.
Christina Aguilera has a fantasy sequence in her head where she does
Diamonds Are a
Girl's Best Friend.
Well, and I think the part of that is because neo-burlesque has leaned a lot more into a lot of reference material and modern stuff and nerdlesque, whereas like classic burlesque is still abound, and there are tons of performers who do it beautifully, but it's not in the same form it was even 2, 3, or 4 years ago.
No, it's actually far more common, and I love it. I mean, I'm a fan, which is something that I appreciate still in myself after doing this for as long as I have. It'll be 13 years this September.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah, I've been
Longest
DJing.
I've done anything.
This July, it'll be 7 years I'm DJing. And I've only been producing for however long the Magical Go Burlesque has been around, so almost 3 years.
But there are performers like Hita St. Cyr, or even Monroe Lilly, who are very classically bodied and shaped, and the way that they va-va-voom on stage, and the way that they dress a lot of the time. I mean, Monroe's a little edgier, but than classic burlesque, but they'll do it in gown and glove, but they'll use modern music, or they'll use. It doesn't even have to necessarily be in a rock song. Hita St. Cyr has a gorgeous act to a Fiona Apple ballad. And when she sent me that music, she does it to Slow Like Honey, which was not a single.
Right.
Not probably well remembered by non-fanatics of that album. But as someone who was and is a fanatic of that album title, when she sent it to me, I was like, I can't wait. I can't wait. Because again, it's slow like honey. It's that song. It's that kind of like slow burn. It has no guitar bangs in it or grinds. And I love it. I love that. But I'm all about just mixing it up. I love a classic sensibility, don't get me wrong. I do love a classic sensibility. I think it lets the audience know early on that you've put effort in.
Sure.
I think that neo-burlesque, a lot of times there is an anticipation that because it's perhaps dressed down, or perhaps that it's not as shiny, that there is not effort put in, which is a misconception. And but I think that well done classic look, noir, or Hollywood bombshell or something like that, it lets the audience know that you've put that work in. Now you have to deliver.
Right.
You've made yourself a beautiful portrait. Now what are you going to do? And I love when that beautiful portrait is rocking out. I think it's so cool.
Me too. And what's funny is, like, you mentioned classic burlesque, and the names that come to mind that do classic acts aren't classic bodies or even classic personas. Like,
well, I mean, when I said Keita, I specifically meant the curvy shape,
right?
And the but she's just drowned in a gown. You can't take that from her.
Right, but what I'm saying is like my favorite classic performers aren't even people that like mainstream media would consider classic performers, like Broody. Like I think classic, I think Broody, because of all the performers I know that I talk to regularly, he's the one who does more. If his acts reference anything, it's a style, a time period, sensibility, less than direct references. Which he said that he's working on some stuff and he does want to do more of that, but for the most part. He references a period of time or mentality or style, which I always find really gorgeous.
Mm-hmm. Also, underrated classic Tiger Bay.
Oh, yeah.
She's a big weirdo, but she also she can do a smolder.
Oh,
really
absolutely.
Really nicely.
One of my favorite acts of hers that I don't know if other people would consider classic, but to me it feels classic because even though it's sort of referential, it's more about how she moves. Her Vigilante act, to me, is a classic act because it's all about her smolder and her movement. Like the fact that she's wearing armor and has a baseball bat makes it a nerd reference as well. Ish, like
apocalyptic,
she's but for me it's more classic because like I'm watching her face, I'm watching how she moves her hips, like because it's all very purposeful movement.
Her Electric Eel act is also very similar in that regard.
Yes,
because that's not a specific reference, a fandom, as far as I know.
Yeah,
there's not a specific fandom.
A lot of her acts are not specific fandoms.
Right,
they're just weird, awesome stuff, like her Lightning Storm act, her Burger Mom act.
Have you seen the Long Socks act?
No.
Yeah, check that out.
I'll have to look that up. Yeah, Tiger Bay is a performer who, like, I just don't understand how her brain works, and it's fascinating.
Well, I mean, there was at one point I had I look at the performers that I book, and I try to be as varied as possible for many reasons, not the least of which I try to curate an audience that will feel like they'll have missed something if they don't come a week.
Right.
I want them to feel that they have to come, and that you do what you can. And there are some performers that are immediately go to, and the reasons for that are not necessarily because I assume the audience will say I can't wait for them to see what they do next.
Right.
But because working with them elevates the show. It
Absolutely.
allows the show to be as good as it can be, and it allows some of the performers who are also quite good to explore, be a little less polished than normal, perhaps.
Right.
Or it allows me, certainly, I'll say it right now, I am by no means threatened by working with Broody or Monroe or Jack Barrow or Lute Alfred Douglas, these performers who are also male-presenting burlesque performers. Working with them, I feel, makes me feel better because there's a certain relief in knowing that the show's going to be as good as it is because I've booked them. And then it lets me concentrate on my own work, on my own personal act or acts that I'm doing that night, and then know that it's not that I'm fighting to live up to that level, it's that I know I have my own level. And then if you have the absolute privilege of having more than one or two of them in one single show, then that show's going to be, a bomb blast. You can't improve upon that.
Yeah.
And that's also true of non-binary and female presenting performers.
Absolutely. I think for me, now that I have a producer brain, so for example, the video game show, which you are a headliner for, your Kefka act, which I had been on a mission to book since I saw it at Nerdless Fest, which was the first act I ever saw you do. Ever, I think.
Wow.
Because you did it that year at the Nerdless Fest. That was the act you did. That was the last year that Danger produced it, was your first year.
That was where was that?
That was at
Le Poisson Rouge?
Yeah, one night was at Le Poisson Rouge and one night was at
my night was at Le Poisson Rouge.
Right. Yeah. And then the other night was at not Hammerstein, Webster Hall.
Yeah. May it rest in peace.
May it rest in peace, though supposedly it may come back. Who knows? But I had always wanted to book that act, and I also knew that if you agreed to do the show, that you had to headline because I know the energy of that act.
Okay.
And while any of those acts probably could have headlined that show, for me, I felt like I could bank on you also because that character is a well-known video game character. And also because, like, for example, Petra's act, even though, like, in the marketing, she was billed as Mario, the act is a reveal. And and so at the live show, I didn't mention it, because I wanted it to be a surprise and a reveal.
Right.
So I didn't talk about it in the preamble. But I felt so confident about that show because I had so many performers I trusted in it. And I booked acts that I knew well or that I knew the performer would deliver on. Mm-hmm. Like Dick Move, while I didn't know that act, I did know his Venom act, and I did know his...
You know what he's capable of.
Right, and that, 99.9% of the time, he delivers in a way that floors the audience.
Right. Well, some performers, when you're booking, you're very specific about what you want from them.
Right.
And some performers are like, what do you got?
Yeah.
What do you got?
And like for the comparative point for the December show, which you also headlined...
was I last?
I thought either you or Anya was last. I was pretty sure it was you.
Anya.
Yeah, you were last. You created a new act for that show.
I did.
And that show was, I literally threw out to the world, hey, who wants to do a December show? Yeah. I just want to fill the room. We're going to have a live band. And you said, I want to do this song. I have an idea. And I said, do it, because I trusted you.
To your credit, though, I probably would not have submitted for that show had it not been a Magical Girl show. Because having worked with you and knowing that, like, if it had just been, XYZ producer who I either didn't know very well or that I didn't have a friendship with, it's not a fandom, especially fandom shows are tough.
Right.
Because you gotta, how referential do you want to be? And when it's a musical reference that everyone's doing an act to these songs, but there's no visual that's implied.
Right.
I would have been perhaps apprehensive about submitting for it. I probably would not have said, what could I do? But because it was Magical Girl and having worked with you and knowing what y'all are capable of and knowing that it would have been a good show, that's why I felt confident to submit for it.
That's interesting to know.
I mean, it
makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, because it's not, well, for one thing, it's not a band that I adore.
Right.
It's a band that I'm familiar with to an extent, and it was specifically a song that I already knew.
Right.
That song I liked independent of it being the Decemberists.
Right.
So...
But what I like about doing those musical shows, the shows based on a band, is that because I'm a music nerd, like, that's interesting to me is I get to...
Interpretation.
And I get to curate a set list literally just based on the music because the act... almost doesn't matter for the curation of the set list. I want to create a flow based on the music.
Right. Unless, well, I will say yes, with the possible exception if someone is subverting what's happening in the song.
Absolutely.
Which definitely happened when I did the Celine Dion shows.
Right.
Because there are people who are not playing it straight and there are people who are playing it totally straight.
Right. And what was interesting about the December show is that everyone played it straight, but to different levels. Like, Maggie McMuffin's drag debut act that she did, which was freaking phenomenal, which was also a new act, that was sort of tongue-in-cheek, but still played pretty straight because it followed the narrative. It was a narrative act. And that was really interesting to me. But everyone else played it straight. And, the Decemberists...
The soundtrack, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And what's been really fun post that show is, so for the playlist I curated for that show also... the songs from the performers obviously weren't in the playlist. Mm-hmm. But after the show was over, since I don't know when we're going to do it again, I reinserted the performers' music in order into the playlist. Mm-hmm. And it still sounds really great in order, which
makes
I
a great
love.
Mixtape still.
It does. Yeah. And I thought that was really fascinating. What I like about booking a show based on the music versus the acts is that mixtape vibe. Because booking the video game show is all based on the acts. And like I put Waluigi in set 1 and Mario in set 2 because I wanted to separate the Mario characters.
I mean, I come from a history as a child making fake set lists and making fake discographies for musicians that I made up. It was a thing I did.
Wow.
I know.
I already knew about the fanzines, but this is another level.
Well, so I created I don't remember what quite came first, but I think I created like a girl band. Like a
Spice Girls?
No, more rock.
Okay, so like Bangles maybe.
More Bangles, Runaways style.
Okay.
And then I say made up. Like I wrote down I would sometimes also design the CD covers, but I'm not an artist. So I would just write the songs that I thought. I'd actually, to the point where I would know how long they were, and then I would also make like, this were the singles, and these were the producers, and then it sort of spanned, and I created this was like a sort of a time waste technique that I had, just to sort of fill time. And I would do it even in school when I was bored. I would do it when I was home. Before I went to sleep. I do not know what encouraged it, and I don't want to. And I do not want to imply that I shared this with the world. I was usually pretty private about it. Not that I was necessarily embarrassed, but I didn't think anybody would care. Right. This fictional band, and then it would go spill into what the tour schedule was and things like that.
That's really funny.
I have a few of them because eventually I did do them typed, but I don't know really what inspired it, but I know that because that whatever it is in me, it spills into being useful when I am either doing playlists for events or when I'm scheduling shows. But then, of course, shows always throw you a curveball because someone has to leave early, or this song is this long and I need someone a little longer than that because I'm going in and I need to follow it and I need extra time. Right. There's always something. But even it's sort of a fun puzzle about it. Like right. I call it the and then knowing which performers are working with, I call it the the goose, the grain, and the fox. Which right. do you put in the boat first and get right. across? And that also falls into play with performers that either don't play well together or that I would love to see together.
Right.
To put a positive spin on it. That I don't think I've ever seen these people in the same show.
Yeah, kind of like zhuzhing them. Like, let's get these two together, see what happens.
And frankly, I mean, that's going to happen when you come to looking at people of similar body types. They're almost never in the same show.
Right.
Lillian Bussell said that the Silver Tusk Awards was, I think, the second show ever that she and Fancy Feast were both in the same show.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely.
It just doesn't happen. And then to have multiple people of color, multiple of gender expression, it's just maneuvering and keeping it, interesting for the audience so the eye doesn't get lazy, but also celebrating the fact that there are people who may look alike, but their expression is entirely different. Right. Because you cannot tell me at all, as much as they may have in common, that Lillian Bussell and Fancy Feast are very, very similar performers. They're just not.
No, not at all. Absolutely.
So I think it also, having similar shaped people or similar, people with perhaps similarly melanated people or people of similar styles or looks, they're going to subvert even expectation in that regard.
Yeah.
You could have a show with two very statuesque black performers like Monroe Lily and Miscellaneous Dom Top, and those performers, while you may assume incorrectly that they would have a lot in common, they just don't.
No, and they're actually very good friends.
Absolutely.
And and that's the funny
And in some way, they're two sides of a similar coin.
Right.
But there's a lot of change in that pocket.
Right, but then again, the way they perform, sometimes there's a ton of similarity, like just how they present themselves. So they're both very dramatic,
yes,
like big steps, presenting performers.
But Miscellaneous is almost always going to come from more of a dancer.
Right.
So there's always going to be different strengths that are being pulled.
Yeah.
And that's true also with Fancy. There is an athleticism that I think she pulls from, and Lillian pulls from more of a sweet.
Yeah.
There's more of a sweet in Lillian, and there's more of a sardonic in Fancy.
Well, and she's more of I'd say Lillian's more of a classic performer. She likes to sing. She likes to do
definitely an interpretation of it.
Yeah.
But she has some weird shit in her.
Oh, of course. Absolutely. Yeah. And I don't even know what question I asked that got us on this tangent.
I think we just sort of talking about set listing and putting shows together.
Well, and I think because I was also excited to share in the fact that I've definitely been inspired by you and taken a lot of cues from you as far as producing and
Please
as far
tell
as...
me more.
Yes, I'm sure. But no, also seeing you perform over the years now and having to gotten to work with you, having hosted White Elephant, DJing for White Elephant, you were the first person to give me a place to be me besides Magical Girl. Like, I DJ'd for other people, but I never you're the first show I hosted that wasn't Magical Girl. And you've let me do it more than once, which means I wasn't terrible at it. Or not that many people complained.
No, not that many.
Yeah, that's
They
good.
say how many letters counts as multiple people? No. But that's the thing also, is a lot of times, and that's my feeling, especially towards White Elephant, which ties to my how inviting is your bar show, frankly. Right. It's that we're on your side. Everyone's on your side. I don't want... We're all going to have moments where we feel a certain way about performers, or we feel a certain way about the chances that they're given or that we missed, or what we're not capable of but that we see in other people. But the opportunity that White Elephant provides is for us to celebrate what we can't also do ourselves.
Right.
And so when I feel that working in a weekly context and now a semi-weekly context, I mean, as it is, I mean, I still had other shows that I was doing,
right,
and meeting other people.
You were never someone I would call lazy or slow going.
I'm certainly busy.
Yes.
There are varying degrees of effort involved, but I'm certainly busy.
Yes.
But I mean, having worked with someone like Femme Appeal, that I now have acts that I can say I wouldn't be doing that act that way had I not met Femme Appeal.
Yes.
My Mouse act is an example of me sort of not letting go, because I think Femme, for as much as we give her credit for being ridiculous, there is a concentration there.
Oh, absolutely. There's a focus because she's actually a fairly quiet person off the stage.
Yeah.
But you would never guess that by her performances.
And it's a great gift if you get her to laugh, like really laugh.
It's my favorite. Usually I can do it by just telling her after an act how stupid she is. Yeah. That's usually a good way to laugh, because my favorite thing about the burlesque community is that, for the most part, it's unanimously understood that if you call someone stupid or an act stupid, it's a compliment. It's that it's over the top.
Like, folks, you're going to see some stupid shit tonight. Yeah, absolutely.
And, you know, but also something that I would give you credit for is my interactions with the audience have changed in a way because of the way you address the audience, that it's not just ladies and gentlemen, that it's not just, you know...
Yeah, actually, I've removed the term ladies and gentlemen from my general vocabulary.
And I try to as well, and I first started noticing it at your shows, but also I give a lot of my, not my queer awakening, because I've always been bi, but like, I guess my learning and growth in queer spaces to White Elephant, because it was
your implementation.
It was the first space where I saw a drag queen 1 minute, and then a non-binary performer the next, and then, you know, a gay performer, and then and all different body types, all different walks of life. And I just hadn't had that experience at other shows, because a lot of shows I had were very straight presenting, even if they weren't straight.
Well, I mean, but that's the thing, is that burlesque performer, drag queen, or drag performer, all of these are distinctions. They're job titles.
Right.
And we gender them, which is funny, but we gender them, but that means we can ungender them if we want to, if we want to focus on that. And I mean, I was a fan of the term ladies and gentlemen, because I think it's a really elegant phrase. I think it just sounds very, you know, but there was a point where it started hitting my ear wrong.
Right.
And I never particularly liked the variations of ladies and gentlemen that included additions.
Right.
I spoke to Anya Keister about, there's a segment in Kinky Boots, which is an imperfect film, but is a lot of fun, where they say, ladies, gentlemen, and those who have yet to make up their minds. And I get what that line implies to some people, but I believe that what you feel it's implying, you're inferring.
Right.
And I think there's a distinctive difference. But what that film does not include, for better or worse, is it doesn't include people who have made up their minds, and they're neither of those things.
Right.
And that's just either a failing of that film if you feel that it doesn't properly do it, or it is just an element of that film if you feel it's a non-issue. I will let other people handle that.
Right.
I feel it is an element of that film, and that character hasn't been exposed to what they eventually may.
Right.
That film is a time capsule, like most films are. We have a real obsession with making things timeless.
Yeah, that's a whole other thing.
We have a real obsession with saying that this movie has to apply forever, and it frankly it can't.
No, it doesn't. Yeah.
And that's a lot to ask of our filmmakers. But to that end, so I mean, I've heard people like who have and those in between or those other, and I'm like, that. I mean, I get your inclusivity, but it still feels rather forced. So I would just like to avoid it entirely.
Well, yeah, you're and people who don't have time for that nonsense.
Oh, well,
variation.
Because frankly, gender is if it is indeed, if we're at least going to agree on the idea that it is a construct.
Yeah.
Some people may say it is a construct that matters, and some people say it's a construct that doesn't matter, and some people say it's a construct that is God's way.
Right.
And that all of those things are, have their levels of validity. But there's no reason to force the issue when you're just introducing people. It's really what it is that it's saying, I know that gender is a construct. Some of us have chosen that construct. Some of us don't know we have that choice yet. And some of us are not comfortable figuring that out right now.
Right.
I personally, while I identify as a man and specifically have used the term gay man, I also use the term queer. Mm-hmm. And I know that for some people, a large portion, in fact, the word queer does not have positive connotations. The term queer is a slur, and it is something that is said about other people, but is not something that everyone can reclaim, because not everyone has agreed on it.
Really? I didn't know that.
Oh, absolutely. You Google it, and you will find
I believe you. I mean... Yeah,
I find it a very inclusive term.
Me too.
It was a term or a word that I hadn't grown up with.
Right.
And that may be the difference.
Right.
I grew up with very, very little slur in my existence, because by the time I was in middle school and high school, when people were using, sexuality or gender expression as a failing as a human being, or as a way of being different, or in calling that out in a negative context, you just said gay.
Yeah,
because that's what you meant.
Right.
And you meant faggot, but you didn't have to say faggot.
Right.
And that was interesting for me, because I didn't really grow up much with that either.
Right.
To a degree, yes.
Yeah, I grew up with it in high school. I remember people calling me gay or saying that's gay. Mm-hmm. And I don't remember, but that's all I kind of remember. I don't remember many people when I was young calling me, using the word faggot. Mm-hmm. I feel like if they did, it was rare. It was more what you're saying.
It was an older person's term at that point.
Right.
Yeah.
But also...
and then an older person's term, or at least on this coast.
Right.
I mean, your queer will definitely still has an existence in the Midwest.
Right.
As a current slur.
Right.
And it still can here too. Yeah. I mean, I'm of the opinion that anything can be a slur as long as it is not the technical term and you use the word fucking in front of it.
Yeah.
If you say fucking something and you're saying it, even if it is the technical term,
it's still with an aggression.
It becomes an aggression. Yes. Yeah.
And
I understand there are people who are of the opinion that you can say, that and also physical violence.
Right, obviously.
But there are people who say that you can reclaim terms that have a painful past, but that it gets murky because, even Mean Girls, which is, how our generation exists.
Pretty much. Everything goes back to
Everything goes back to Mean Girls. That Tina Fey's character, and it's important to remember that Tina Fey also wrote that film.
Yeah.
That you have to stop calling yourselves sluts and whores. It just gives boys an excuse to call you sluts and whores. And that line has always just sort of pinged me.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that's true. And I think that's a shitty way of of looking at it. No, the way I refer to myself does not give you the permission to refer to me that way.
Right, one has nothing to do with the other.
And that it gets into derogatory language that white people and white cis people traditionally feel entitled to when it comes to the black community and it comes to the transgender community. Those two words, and you already, dear listener, you already know exactly what words those are because, non-language is powerful. We are at a point where we're so impatient with, I think, cultural progression and cultural movement and quote unquote PC culture and millennials and all that we just want to say, fuck it, let's just have access to all the words.
Right.
Or all the phrasing. And I'm like, no, that's not responsible.
No.
So I understand if people don't like the word queer.
Yeah.
I happen to like it. I happen to identify by it, which means you can't tell me not to identify as it. But I'm not going to call you a queer person if that's going to make you uncomfortable.
Of course.
And
I think also I've set a precedent to always ask pronouns and always try and be understanding, know what's going on. And I found that I have misgendered friends. I have one of my good friends that I'm not going to call by name just in case they don't want me to mention that I've misgendered them. But because they often present to what I imagine as femme, I accidentally use she often.
Sure.
But whenever I do it, I immediately go, shoot, I meant they, I'm sorry. And they are always the sweetest, most understanding person because they know I'm not doing it to misgender them on purpose. They know that it's a mistake because I'm trying to untrain my brain. Yeah. Because when I look at someone and they appear as femme to me, my brain wants to use a pronoun that I've always used, even if it's not what they want. And so I'm trying to deprogram that. Like, I used to have trouble keeping people's legal and show names separate if I knew both. And now I code switch pretty easily for the most part. I think I have the most trouble with Betty and Raina only because they also don't care that much because they go by both those names, as far as I know, and they can tell me otherwise if they don't necessarily agree. But my understanding is they don't mind, and also because I knew them before they had show names, or that I knew their show names anyway. And so, but there are other performers who absolutely don't want to be identified by their legal names, or I don't even know them.
Absolutely.
And so, I've gotten so good at code switching, for the most part, I never have that problem. But I still find myself sometimes struggling with pronouns. And again, it's not a malicious thing. It's just, I'm trying to tell my brain, just because that person looks like a boy to me doesn't mean that's what they want to be identified as.
Right. It doesn't mean that's what they are.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's just it.
Yeah.
You're right. Identify as is the wrong term.
Yeah.
That's what they are. And so I try and so I'm still pushing against that.
Yeah. Well, it's always going to happen.
Right. And
we're going to die trying.
Yeah,
like that's the
that's
thing.
for sure. Yeah.
We're a cog. We're not the end all.
Yeah.
What I think is important though is for us to recognize that we are that cog, we are that middle ground, and that even if it's not the next generation immediately under us, even if we don't have children that we then teach that to, there is going to be a group of people where they won't think about it as hard as we do.
Right.
And that can only happen if we do it.
Right.
That can only happen
Absolutely.
if we do it. I mean, that's how change works. I mean, that may sound really basic, but people get really impatient about it, and they're like, I thought that racism was over, or, oh, you should get over it. And I'm like, I'm sorry, that's never going to happen in your lifetime, and you might as well just fuck up, because we are all going to, our generation, and I know that we are the same age, but frankly, anyone who's slightly older than us or slightly younger than us, and possibly even further in that spectrum, because age is becoming so impractical, a litmus test to understand sophistication and awareness and where you're coming from. I mean,
maturity.
I grew up of the youngest person of a lot of my social circles because that's just how it was.
Right.
And that was through Rocky Horror, but that was also because I was friendly or friends with people that were people who would refer to my parents' friends. So I'm like, yeah, but they're my friends too. Yeah,
absolutely.
We're not like, going to cocktail parties and talking about, the deficit, but I have a friendship connection with them on whatever level. So I don't even know if we can say generations anymore, because what the hell does that even mean?
Well, yeah, and it's like the demographics, I feel like, don't even mean anything anymore. Like, a lot, you know for a fact, as well as the listeners, that I love a lot of different nerdy things, and like one of the things I love is video games, which used to be considered kids' toys. My brother, who I love very much, who's 9 years older than me, treats it that way.
Right. Because 30 years old, 30 years ago, that's how it was.
Right.
Presented.
And also, I think because he has young kids who are now teenagers, which is terrifying to me, to their kids, they're playing video games, so in his mind, it's still the case.
Yeah.
But he doesn't really look at it this way anymore. But when I first started talking to them about video games, he's like, oh, it's kids' toys. But it's not. There are people older than me who love video games. Yes. Famously, there's a grandmother who plays the game Skyrim on YouTube.
Yes, I've seen
just
her
got
to.
mocapped to be in the next Elder Scrolls game. They're putting her as a character in that game.
Yeah.
And it's to celebrate this woman who wouldn't, by demographics, be the person they'd advertise to, and they're trying to break those stereotypes.
I don't know if demographics and the anticipation of what demographics mean takes into account travel.
No.
I think at one point, because travel was so impossible for the majority of, society, that it was so expensive, that it was so inaccessible, that women couldn't go out on their own, like things like that.
Right.
That we've boxed a lot of the expectation on what this person likes or what this person's supposed to like. I've talked to, on my podcast, every once in a while when I speak to a performer of color, I think it's important to ask, what are some of the preconceived expectations of you as a performer that you are working against? Because I'm hoping that the next person who listens to that knows not to do it.
Right.
And I know that's a lot of work on their part to get into if it comes up. But it's interesting to me whenever Nick's Nocturne is an example. They are a really fabulous performer that loves that has a very gothic sensibility. And they love sort of like industrial metal music. And there was at one point where they, as a black person who is femme, there was an expectation that they would be an R&B fan.
Right.
Or that they would somehow be able to fit into a booking as a certain way. And they're like, nope. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, bye. And that's all preconceived.
Right.
That's
Absolutely.
most of what we're going to be spending all of our lives fighting against our own preconceived notions and everybody else's. That's part of the deal.
Yeah, and I think that's something I became more aware of as a producer. I mean, I also became more aware of it just going to more shows and doing this podcast as long as I have. But I'm always trying to... That's why I feel like while I do come to this podcast with a mental list of questions, at the end of the day, wherever the conversation goes, I just follow along. Yeah. Because I want to hear what the guest is thinking and going through and experiencing. I want to take it back to talking about your podcast since you brought it up.
Oh, sure.
You're in the current second season. Yes. As someone who, at least in this show, has not done seasons and just is going as long as I can, what are your metrics for seasons, and what do you plan? What are your next big things you want to do with this podcast? We're going to talk about your other projects in a minute.
Yeah, sure.
But like, I know I've been a guest on several specials that you've done, talking about, you did one for Mother's Day, talking about show parents. You've done stuff about when RuPaul, the hullabaloo with RuPaul putting their foot in their mouth.
Yeah. And one of the few times,
yeah, they never do that.
Yeah.
Do you foresee yourself doing more stuff like that or trying new things? And what defines a season for you for the show?
I mean, it's a really boring answer, but it came up organically. 30 episodes is a season.
Okay.
So, and that it keeps things really easy for me. So I did 30 episodes before I had burnout. So that tells me that from there on out, I'll take a 2-month break, at least.
After 30 episodes?
After 30 episodes.
Okay.
So as I said, I have 52 in the can already, which means that the 2 episodes that I have next scheduled will go into this current season, and the 2 more that I have after that, which I think I have scheduled for next week, will go into that. But once I hit 60, the expectation, although,
Who knows?
I run the business.
Right.
Is that I will then take a 2-month break. It's not so much that it's a literal season. I guess it's more of a cycle.
Right.
You know, like America's Next Top Model. Because it's not literally based on the fall season, which is what season means usually.
Sure,
it's the spring season or the fall season. But it made sense to me, especially actually it works out this way where I will be extraordinarily busy when I do take that hiatus if I am on schedule. Mm-hmm. It's funny. I have no responsibilities for the podcast, but I do take it fairly seriously.
Welcome to my world.
I know. I mean, there are no stakes. There's really no stakes.
None.
Except things are preserved forever.
Right.
So, in theory, it lives forever. Someone still has to listen to it and give a fuck, but it is. There are no stakes, and there are no transcriptions that I know of. So even that, it's hard. You can't even search.
Right.
It won't easily be found.
The last time I Googled autographs. No, actually, the last time I Googled We Burlesque the podcast, I found a top something list of burlesque related podcasts.
Oh yes.
And both of us ended up on it
because it's based on metrics. It's based on the term,
which I thought was fascinating.
Yeah.
Because I would have never yes, I've had a lot of burlesque performers on the show, but I would never have thought to put this amongst top burlesque related podcasts. But I mean, and God bless her, Anya did the same thing. She posted not that long ago in several burlesque groups, hey, if you want to talk about burlesque or be on a podcast, these two shows have burlesque performers. And I was really humbled that she thought of me, you know.
I mean, I'm kind of the thought. I mean, I talk a lot about how I think drag is more mainstream than burlesque, and I think that's because.
Well, it's because there's a TV show featuring it.
Yes, but there's a reason there's a TV show featuring it. The TV show featuring it has a very specific mindset. It still has elements of misogyny. Mm-hmm. It still has men running the show.
Yeah.
And it still presents the most successful drag queens in that fall into really two categories. Either the unattainable ice princess or the comedy queen.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with either of those criteria. I mean,
but there's more than that.
But there's more to it, and those aren't identities. Those are traits, but those aren't identities.
Right.
But it's easier for us to shorthand that.
Yeah.
When you get into burlesque and you start dealing with women's agency and women telling their own story and women being varied as they are, and then people who actually you assume are women but apparently are not, and getting into that discussion, it's so complex and it's so their story that I think that the idea of having, I mean, if it was approachable, we would have had Dita's Next Race by now.
That's true, yeah.
The fact that Dita Von Teese, who is relatively concerned, the most successful burlesque performer, but not really for her burlesque,
right,
is telling.
Yeah.
We've had how many movies that have included everything from drag performers to transgender individuals to men in dresses for gags. Those are subplots.
Right.
There's no burlesque subplots,
That's
let alone multiple media representation.
Yeah, I can only think of relatively recently there have been several SNL sketches that have dabbled.
Very strong opinions about them.
I don't blame you. There was there was a magician sketch that was about burlesque magicians or something that was very I thought, who is this for? Because I get some of the gags because I know a lot of magicians.
That is a very important question.
Yeah.
And who is this for?
There was a recent sketch about video games that I actually thought was very funny with Kit Harington about a VR game where this character is just trying to go kill zombies, and he's getting stuck between drama between two NPC characters who just want to bicker or talk about each other. I thought that was hilarious.
Because you were in that who it was for.
But I don't understand how a mainstream non-gamer is going to... I mean, I guess it's fairly translatable, but to me it just seemed funny because I play games.
As much of a travesty as it is frequently referred to as, The Big Bang Theory makes a lot of deeper, nerdy references.
That's true.
And the thing is, the joke of it is that it's gibberish.
Yeah.
For the typical audience.
Right.
That show is not for gamers or enthusiasts.
Most of the jokes are laughing at them, not with them.
Right, exactly. So, and I find actually there was that recent burlesque sketch where I don't know the actor's name, but he plays Jon Snow on Game of Thrones.
Kit Harington.
There you go.
Yeah.
He played a guy who did a burlesque routine, quote unquote, for his wife's bachelorette party.
Right.
And it wasn't for burlesque enthusiasts.
No.
It wasn't for burlesque performers. It was for an audience who didn't really know what it was.
Right.
And that is the point where I sort of felt it was, I don't want to say insensitive because who cares?
Right.
But it wasn't right. It wasn't correct.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you can subvert or make fun of something that the general population doesn't have an observational idea of.
Yeah.
Can you make fun of something that you can't play also straight? And I don't think the general purpose audience of Saturday Night Live, certainly not the writer of that sketch, because it didn't sound like that person knew everything.
Right.
It involved tucking. It involved elements of drag. It involved...
it feels like they Googled...
Yes.
Like, buzzwords about burlesque and then put it in a script.
And assumed that it must be similar to the point where, like, that could have been really funny.
Yeah. And also, Kit Harington
seems lazy.
Right. And Kit Harington is a good actor who has good timing. Because, again, in that video game sketch I mentioned, his sincerity was...
Oh, was it the same episode?
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
Is so funny.
Yeah.
Because he's playing it so straight about how he's concerned about this other character and that he really runs this house. And he's talking with this gruff, gamer macho guy voice. Like, yeah, it just seems odd.
But it's also really difficult for professionals to then critique it, because then we just sound like we're bitching.
Yeah.
And that we have no sense of humor. Like, no, I do. That's why I didn't like it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that I didn't think... Some of it was funny.
Yeah,
Don't get me wrong. There were some really funny ideas in that sketch. But almost none of them were what it was referencing.
Right.
All of the really great moments in that were largely the cast.
Right.
Leslie Jones, frankly, is funny.
All the time.
All the time.
Literally everything she does.
Which means that I would love to see them in a dramatic role, because that tells me that I would love to see them in a dramatic role.
Leslie Jones still has done my favorite sketch in recent years, because I don't watch a lot of SNL, and it's the one she did with Matt Damon about Weezer. Because I'm also a Weezer fan.
I have seen that.
But that sketch... Because also...
just the rattling off.
Well, and because I'm a music nerd, and so not only
good.
is it impressive that they're going to, specific songs and points that actual music nerds I've heard argue, but also they're doing it in such a sincere way that it translates.
Which it's still gibberish for people who don't know what they're talking about.
Right.
But it's believable, because I didn't know half those references. I know only the singles that Weezer has ever done. I don't know any deep cuts.
Right.
So the fact that they're able to recite it like that tells me that it's funny, because they're actually referring to things that are real.
Right.
The delivery of it is important.
Right.
And I mean, Leslie had the best line, like, he's still not naked. That was the best line of that sketch. But to be perfectly blunt, it was... Again, I struggle with terminology, because, again, saying it was disrespectful makes me seem like I've...
You're oversensitive?
Maybe.
I don't know.
But it wasn't fun. I'll just put it, I didn't think it was funny.
Yeah.
I thought it sucked. Frankly, I thought it sucked. It doesn't actually, to be fair, it doesn't actually matter if I thought it was offensive, insensitive, incorrect, or whatever. I just thought it sucked.
And it's supposed to be funny. And so if you don't think it's funny, it's missing the mark.
Frankly, who that should have been for,
right,
I have to say, a little disappointed. Right. A little disappointed that will be... because burlesque is such a microcosm within a microcosm within a microcosm, that will be someone's, and a couple people for a while, the first thing they think of.
Of course.
Or the second thing they think of.
Sure.
And high in Google results.
Yeah.
And it's just, that tells us that we as burlesque professionals and aficionados, that if we want our work to be funny and accurate, that we have a lot of work to do, because... we have to start telling more people about it, so that when they write a comedy sketch about it, They get it right.
Yeah.
Because I find burlesque hysterical.
Yeah.
A lot of the time.
Oh, me too. And actually, those are the acts I prefer most of the time. I like serious acts, but comedy is...
Well, no, because it feels good to laugh.
Right. Well,
it releases endorphins.
Referring back to your podcast, your second to most recent episode, as of when we're recording, was with Abby Fantastic.
Yes.
And I didn't know she did stand-up.
I didn't know her much at all. I thought I did until I started talking to her.
And it was so great to hear all of that.
Yeah.
And, I think that for me, while I do love a good slow burn sexy act, and if I'm attracted to the person,
sure,
that helps for those kinds of acts. But funny acts, all it needs to be is funny. It doesn't matter body type.
Yeah.
Also,
it's funny when you're attracted to that person for the 5 minutes that they're on stage.
Right,
but not usually.
Not usually.
That's skill.
Yes,
that's
absolutely.
Skill. It is really easy to be fuckable all the time.
Yeah.
But to be fuckable for 5 minutes, I think is
a skill. I would agree. I don't even know where we were going. So we're going to go back to talking about podcasting. Yeah. You've been podcasting for a while, but now anyone who's been listening to your show has noticed at the end of the show, if they listen all the way through, there's a new ad for something there, but it's not very clear what happening.
It is.
So you're working on a new project that I happen to know because you've told me about it. Do you want to talk a little bit about it?
Sure. Accountability, man. So it's a new project on an old project. In 2011, I started working on a burlesque show that was scheduled for February 2012. Mm-hmm. So most of my 2011 with my then co-director, Femfe LaButch, was spent on casting and sorting it out. And this was one of those Central Jersey conventions that was very goth and very Renaissance Fair friendly. And the theme of that one was sort of like Halloween in February, because Halloween obviously can't come enough. So I wanted to do a haunted house or haunted hotel specifically. Hotels have always been a very important thing in the ether that is me. I have dreams a lot that take place in hotels.
Interesting.
And I consider hotels to be an excellent metaphor for what we as people go through. They're transitional spaces. Mm-hmm. You do not live at a hotel usually, and you do not stay at a hotel always because it's your idea. So sometimes you're staying at a hotel because it just happened that way, because your car broke down, or because you happen to be in the area, or you can't get somewhere, or your house was ravaged by poltergeists, and you have to go to the hotel and move the TV out. Sometimes that happens. Right. So I wanted to do that. So I talked to my co-director and I created the sketch of it. And with them, I helped create that sketch into a show that I spent a lot of time on, and it was called The Dead Sexy Hotel, not to be confused with Dead Sexy Burlesque, which also was running at the same time, but I hadn't known Johnny Porkpie yet. But The Dead Sexy Hotel, which was about this fictional hotel called the Gilman, which was run by German immigrants who then disappeared. And then Lionel Gilman renamed it, and there's sort of a mystery about it. And it wasn't necessarily meant to be horror. Mm-hmm. It was at least, gothic horror maybe, because gothic horror is more mood-based
than necessarily like jump scares or anything.
Right. There were parts of that show that the cast was we had a really committed cast that created a lot of their acts individually, but had to still be sewn together in some way. So for a lot of so Halloween, for example, had an
shocking
act,
that she was involved.
This is early work with her, actually. Mm-hmm. I think I'd only met her in 2011. We had, I worked with her in 2010, but, so she had an act and I was like, I want that character. I don't want that act though. I want that look though. I want you to be a rock star that has an incident in a hotel. Gretchen Violetta, who I mentioned earlier, who's, my very dear friend, has a very when she styles herself a specific way, has a very old Hollywood actress sort of look. Which it's perfect. She has a great face for it, and I wanted her to play an actress that stays at the hotel, And there were other characters that I was really particular about. I wanted ghost hunters. I played a drifter who had like a trophy case of people that of objects that he had gotten along the way, which implied that he was either a serial killer or that he was a thief or that he was some otherwise nefarious individual. And then he has a moment of conscience in the hotel, and he calls the police, and he continues his narrative. And the centerpiece of this was a character named Denise, who was the daughter of the German immigrants who disappeared. Now, the German immigrants were, depending on what you believe, because I kept things open, and I like the idea of an unreliable narrator, either were shipped away, gotten rid of by Lionel, who just didn't want them around.
Right.
But she didn't go with them. The daughter didn't go with them. And the question then becomes, what happened to Denise?
Right.
Why is she the spirit of the Gilman that is creating all of this unrest? And for the purposes of our show, yes.
Right.
For that show, yes. However, I wanted to explore the opportunities of what that show couldn't. Because it was a burlesque show.
And so you're looking to create it as an audio drama.
Well, right now, what I want to do, sort of inspired by concepts that anything from that show was written before I got to see Sleep No More. But I cannot deny that once I saw Sleep No More, that it did not influence it at all. Absolutely, it did. Down to a few song choices that I wanted as like little interstitials. But I also was heavily influenced by Twin Peaks, and I was also heavily influenced by old Hollywood films and Vincent Price, and just sort of. I also like there's a question of why is it always a Victorian ghost? Why isn't it anything?
Why are there no modern ghosts?
Right. And this also happened before American Horror Story had their hotel season, which actually I have consciously not finished because I didn't want it to rip off. But because that was, I think, 2013, and I was like, shit. I was on the cusp, and I didn't do anything with it. And I said, you know what? A House of Leaves was another example of like this sort of unreliable hodgepodge, piece it together, figure it out, which is why it's a little bit more mystery based.
Right.
And I want the supernatural reasoning behind things to not be the only reason things happened. What if there is no supernatural aspect? We as humans constructed this concept of what Denise does. What happened to the people who were actually there? Why? And I wanted to created sort of like an audio dossier of documents and pieces and short stories and performative pieces that sort of helped move it along. I cannot promise it'll be particularly linear. I did say that I was influenced by Twin Peaks, but I wanted it to. I wanted to enter that world again.
And so is this is going to be a podcast?
It is going to be released as if it was a podcast.
Okay.
I guess it's really more of an anthology series.
Okay. But
it is going to be I'm going to release it on podcast platforms. Yeah.
And do you have an idea of like a loose ETA of when you'd like to start releasing it?
Yes. I would like it to be out during the summer months.
Okay.
I do not at this time know if I want it to be a regular thing. Like right now,
comes out every week or every month or something.
I do that right now with the We Burlesque podcast, and frankly, that can be a lot sometimes.
Yeah. Are you considering releasing it like in a chunk, like a la Netflix, with multiple episodes?
Maybe, and not really episodes. That's the thing, is they're really going to be more of fragments.
Okay.
Some things and just like audio files and like things that are so probably I might like dump like 5, and then those 5 might not have anything to do with each other, but they'll have something to do with each other in the context.
Interesting.
So it's a unconventional way of doing it, which is kind of scary because it's not.
There's no roadmap.
Yeah, it almost seems easier if I did just write like a 200-page novel,
or do something like Night Vale, where it's like it's incoherent but coherent, like
right. And it will be written
right,
but it does and I also want to be able to include, because I am a burlesque person and White Elephant and the Gilman story, honestly, is a burlesque history, or has roots in my burlesque work. I will be working with burlesque professionals in much of the construction of it.
And so for recording the audio files.
Recording the audio, I want to use their voices. I mean, frankly, it's not a lot different than any performer who has a vanity project that they want to do. Where they're like, hey, I'm friends with Neil Patrick Harris. Let me call him.
Right, of course, absolutely.
There's people who do this all the time, and I'm like, y'all are my friends, and also, wouldn't it be neat if we were able to... And the thought is also like this might, again, legitimize and elevate some of the burlesque performers' awareness to show that we aren't just stripping in bars,
right?
But we also are personalities.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that we are public figures. And I think that that's a good thing for burlesque and the industry.
I agree.
We struggle a lot to fight for terminology in the industry that is so inconsequential that let's elevate. Let's actually, like, wouldn't it be cool if burlesque performers were on talk shows? Like, why isn't that
I mean,
happening?
that's part of the reason why I started Autographs, was not so much like burlesque specifically, but it was this idea that I wanted a talk show where people talk for a long time.
Yeah.
And there were a couple shows doing it. One of my great influences is Kevin Pollak and his chat show, which just recently ended after 10 years. But, like, long-form conversation is what I'm interested in.
Yeah.
When Fred Ferguson was the closest to it in nightlife, when he would have an honest conversation with someone that was like 10 or 15 minutes, but I wanted more of that.
Right. Well, because he was actually a genuine host.
Right. He was off book almost all the time.
I don't care for most late-night hosts. I'm not a Jimmy Fallon fan.
Me neither.
I never particularly found Letterman or Leno to be particularly insightful.
The only traditional one I really like is Conan, and that's because his comedy sensibilities would always come through in his late show.
I wish I was more of a Conan fan.
He has a podcast now called Conan Needs a Friend, and it's just him doing long form interviews.
Yeah,
and you might enjoy that more.
Okay, I could check it out. He did an episode with My Favorite Murder Ladies that I'm probably gonna get to eventually.
Right.
So, but yeah, so that's the idea, and I don't want people to think that it's supposed to be anything. It's just an idea at this point.
Cool.
But I've wanted to do it basically since I wanted to write something. Actually, right. I was very inspired by some of the marketing that the Blair Witch Project did.
Right.
They had a whole book about these characters and like the marketing in that, and then movies like Cloverfield and there's a few to varying success. Some movies did incomplete marketing.
Right.
I can't think of the name of the film. The Devil Inside, I think, where the marketing actually killed it on Rotten Tomatoes. People got mad that they had to search for it. But to me, as long as the audience is in on it, I kind of think that's neat. But I don't want to make it too hard, so I'm going to collate everything and put it all in one format. There probably will still be a written version, which I will eventually make public. But the project right now is called Two Night Stay. Viktor Devonne presents Two Night Stay, stories from the Gilman. And some of the stories will take place before the Gilman, but they're basically, what do all these people have in common?
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Well,
Thank you.
I look forward to that.
Thank you.
Keep an eye out for that this summer, maybe.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
If it's not by this summer, then something has happened.
Okay.
Because that is the next thing.
Well, we currently run ads for We Burlesque on this show, and I will be happy to run those ads as well.
Thank you. A special shout out to Micah Edwards, who did the Gilman ad that you hear at the end of.
It's a really cool ad.
Yeah.
The first time I heard it, I was like, "Ooh, something different."
We wrote that, and we didn't know honestly how he was going to deliver it, and he delivered it very stiffly, and it was like, something's wrong. And then he was like, "What if I did like an Eddie Canta voice?" And I was like,
That's it.
That's it, dude. Why the hell didn't we think of that 40 takes ago? But yeah.
Viktor Devonne, thank you for being on my show.
Oh, my pleasure.
I always love having you on. I feel like we could talk all night, but we have other things to do.
Oh no, I have to come up with something else to do now?
But thank you for being on the show.
Yeah.
I'm not sure when this is going up, so just go to We Burlesque, go see it at Rock Bar the first and third Wednesday of every month.
Yeah. Viktor Devonne with a K. Viktor, VIKTORDEVONNE on everything.
On everything. Check out We Burlesque the podcast.
Yeah. I'm pretty easy to find, frankly.
Google them, guys. Check them out. You know the deal. I would love for you to sign us off, but please look up Viktor Devonne everywhere. He'll be back probably in another 2 years, if not sooner.
Yes, that's always the plan.
That's always the plan. It's a 2-year plan. But Viktor, please sign us off, and thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much. Well, music is life. Life is good.
That's it for this episode of Crash Chords Autographs. Our theme music is by Michael Kill. Our logo was designed by Case Aiken and Joey Amons. If you liked the show, please rate and review us on iTunes and Facebook. You'll help us reach more listeners. Questions, comments, or guest recommendations? Email matt.storm@crashchords.com or hit us up on Twitter @CrashChordsWeb. Thanks for listening.
Hi, this is Viktor Devonne, and I am the host of We Burlesque the podcast. Every Monday, I talk to fabulous denizens of nightlife, including burlesque performers, both seasoned and new to the form, drag performers, performance artists, DJs, and artists who make up their respective scenes. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and more. Please visit WeBurlesque.com to check out episode recaps and see all the formats available. And remember that music is life. Life is good.